One of the world's richest men, forced out as leader of Italy, leaving his nation with a debt crisis that threatens to take down Europe. Tonight, we look at Silvio Berlusconi's legacy in politics, in scandal, and in the media colossus he created. Berlusconi, end of an empire.
Good evening from Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York. I'm Sara Eisen. Tonight, Silvio Berlusconi. He dominated Italian politics for almost 2 decades. His power seemed to grow stronger and stronger. Elected prime minister 3 separate times. He beat back enemies, brushed aside an endless string of scandals, and now the self-made billionaire's regime has collapsed in the face of Europe's relentless debt crisis. Over the next 30 minutes, we will take you inside the empire. I'll talk to a man who used to work in the fallen prime minister's government. Also, I'll ask our guest if Italy's crisis is Berlusconi's fault. And what's next for the name of the man who succeeds him and for Europe's 3rd largest economy? Mario Monti was sworn in as Italy's new prime minister today. His mission to immediately enforce drastic budget cuts, pull Italy back from the brink so it doesn't repeat the fate of its neighbors, Ireland, Portugal, and Greece. Monti's leadership begins tomorrow, just days after Berlusconi's dramatic departure. And Bloomberg's David Tweed has more from Rome.
A new era means out with the old. Silvio Berlusconi arrived at the president's palace to resign Saturday, accompanied by jeering. A hiatus, then jubilation.
It was a shame for us, but now it's gone.
This is a great day. This is Liberation Day, we say.
The crowd here may be celebrating Silvio Berlusconi's resignation, but it's going to take years for Italy to recover from the effects of the financial crisis. Berlusconi's demise came days after Greece's George Papandreou stepped down. Europe's debt crisis has claimed governments in Portugal and Ireland as well. Spain goes to the polls this weekend.
We cannot imagine that without Berlusconi our problems are solved, but without Berlusconi we can start working to solve the problems.
And those problems are daunting. Italy has the 2nd highest debt load in Europe. It's bound up in red tape that's caused chronically slow growth. The economist Mario Monti, an unelected official, replaced Berlusconi. He unveiled his new cabinet today.
This is the 2nd time that an unelected official is going to be prime minister. The last time was Carlo Azeglio Ciampi, who was the head of the Bank of Italy. Actually, his government accomplished many things. It put finances back on his good path.
It won't be just Italians who are counting on Monti to get Italy's finances back on the right track. David Tweed, Bloomberg, Rome.
Incoming Prime Minister Monti inherits a country with 10-year government borrowing costs that remain dangerously close to that 7% level. It's a level that pushed Greece, Ireland, and Portugal to leave the debt markets and go to the EU and the IMF for outside help. Joining me now from Washington, Vito Tanzi. He served as Italy's Undersecretary for Economics and Finance for 2 years under Silvio Berlusconi. He also spent 20 years at the International Monetary Fund. Vito, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I want to first ask you of your impression of Silvio Berlusconi during the period that you worked under him.
Well, when I worked for him for about 2 years, a little bit over 2 years, from May 2001 until July 2003, I talked to him several times, and at that time there was a kind of honeymoon with the new government. The government had a majority and lots of commitment, a lot of promises. And I found him always very, very smart, very pleasant. I never had any unpleasant experience with him. And frankly, I was surprised by the way things developed in successive years. At that time, it seemed pretty normal, except that he had some problems with the justice, but were problems from the past. So that overall, in that period, I should add that maybe I was a little bit, I was disappointed with the policies that the government was introducing, and that's why I left after 2 years. I thought that the policy were not what they should have been.
Right. I mean, he came in here. Berlusconi came in. He was supposed to reform the economy. He was a real estate titan, a media mogul. What went wrong?
Well, that was the assumption that he was a manager from the private sector, so he would not know what to do it. But he began to pursue some dreams which were really probably what he should not have done. One dream was that he wanted to cut taxes quite dramatically. In fact, he made a commitment, a promise at the beginning to reduce the tax burden by 4 or 5% of GDP. The second dream is that he would do this without taking, as he used to say, 1 penny from the pockets of Italians. In other words, public spending was not to be touched. The third dream was that somehow, only because he had come into power and he was a manager, the economy would start growing at a much faster pace without really doing it very much. So these three factors put together eventually over time create difficulties. But I should add that the Italian situation today in terms of public debt is not dramatically worse than it used to be in the last 20 years. In the last 20 years we had
I'm glad you brought that up, because we actually painted a picture. We show the total debt as a percentage of Italy's economy. It is now over 100% of the economy. And if you look at that relative to where the economy has been going over the last at least decade, it's basically been going, there's the debt to GDP. The actual GDP has been going nowhere. This is the problem. Can you blame Berlusconi for it?
Well, this is really the problem. The problem is the high debt combined with the no growth in the economy. And the no growth in the economy is not the fault of Berlusconi. It's the fault of all the rules and regulations which have been accumulated over the past. His fault is for not having changed those. He had the power probably to change them, but he was not able to do it.
So now do you see Mario Monti being able to do what Berlusconi couldn't?
Well, I know Mario Monti personally. I've known him for 25 years. I've taught at the Bocconi University at his request. I've contributed to one of his books. I wrote a paper in one of his books, and I happened to have seen him last week in Poland. There was a conference organized by the central bank, and we were there. He's an enormously qualified person. He has the gift of wisdom. He's an extremely wise person. He knows how to move. He knows what to do. And he has chosen a cabinet which is really very, very good. He has chosen people who know the Italian situation very, very well. They are not politicians, so they will not be bound by lobbyists, etc. Now, the main question, of course, is whether Parliament would allow them to promote some of the policy that should have been promoted in the past. If I could add just one additional point on this, the problem with Berlusconi was that he never brought to Parliament many of the policies that needed to be changed. Monti will not have this obstacle because he would not have lobbyists or the Lega, etc., telling him what not to do. So he will be able to more easily bring to Parliament things that need to be changed. Whether Parliament would respond positively, that's an unknown now.
And it's also an unknown whether Mario Monti can do that. He will face political challenges. Remember, he is unelected, but it sounds like you are optimistic now that an economist is in charge. Vito Tanzi, thank you so much for joining us here tonight and for your insights. He was formerly in the Berlusconi government in the Ministry of Finance. Well, still ahead, while management of Italy's economy contributed to the downfall of Berlusconi, criminal trials, public gaffes, and, of course, those bunga-bunga sex parties led to his notoriety. We'll look at the scandals that drove Berlusconi's approval rating to a record low. When Berlusconi, End of an Empire, continues. Welcome back to our Bloomberg special, Berlusconi, the End of an Empire. I'm Sara Eisen. Silvio Berlusconi served 3 terms as Italy's prime minister. He was the longest-serving Italian leader since World War II. It's remarkable staying power in a country that has had more than 60 governments since 1945. And it's even more remarkable in light of the relentless scandals, lawsuits, and sexcapades that filled Berlusconi's years.
Over the last 17 years, Italian politics was dominated by one man, Silvio Berlusconi. But around the world, it wasn't his policies that made headlines. It was a string of sex scandals and near constant allegations of corruption. Arriving in politics in 1994, critics and opponents slammed the brash billionaire, charging that he was leveraging his position and his personal media empire to create a stranglehold on Italy's television industry. Berlusconi may have gotten the boot from Italy's parliament, but his fortune remains intact. From massive media empire Fininvest and his soccer club AC Milan. Not much to frown about there for this cruise ship singer turned prime minister. Whether making derogatory gestures at an EU official or comparing a German politician to a Nazi concentration camp worker, Berlusconi's arrogant jibes are famous and only fueled the fire of his enemies, both at home and abroad. And even though he's out of power, Berlusconi still faces a range of legal woes, from tax fraud to allegations of mafia collusion. Berlusconi currently is the defendant in 4 ongoing criminal trials. And his infamous personal life will likely stay front-page fodder as charges of sex with an underage prostitute hang over him. Don't forget his infamous Bunga Bunga sex palace. At his hedonistic paradise, Berlusconi hosted lavish parties and alleged mass orgies with a mind-boggling number of women. And even one of his former call girls says he isn't about to go away anytime soon. And she's not alone. Many Italians predict Berlusconi will remain a fixture, and maybe even a kingmaker.
Now to discuss the mess that Silvio Berlusconi has left Italy in and what's next for his country, I'm joined by Ruth Santini, the visiting Italian fellow at the Brookings Institution, and Vivien Schmidt, professor of international relations at Boston University. Thank you, ladies, for joining me. Ruth, how did Berlusconi manage to stay in power for so long, given all of the scandals and sexcapades?
Thanks for having me, first of all. That's a very interesting question. So Berlusconi managed to win enormous public approval from the very beginning because he was jumping in a situation of a huge political and moral crisis at the beginning of the 90s, whereby the Italian political system was basically crumbling on the weight of huge political scandals, exploding basically all the main political parties, from the Christian Democrats to the Socialist Party, which basically then disappeared from the political scene. So when these political scandals erupted, Berlusconi managed to sort of, by criticizing these politicians for their sort of perceived lack of touch with reality and with the Italian public man and common man, and so create sort of an aura of being a self-made man, someone with very down-to-earth, capable of turning situations around, with enormous gut instinct, able to lead him through a very complex political system, which then he sort of recreated with a new shape, because he was the main creator and shaper of the Italian bipolar system, which never existed before.
So clearly,
it goes to the credit.
Clearly, it was about him. But Vivien, you've studied the Italian political scene, the society for so long. Clearly, it has to say something about Italy as well. I can't even imagine what would happen if this were in the United States.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here. Yeah, it's more than just Berlusconi as the man, although I agree that he managed to appeal to a large swath of the population, partially because he had a discourse of everything's great, and I'm going to make things better. But also he had a strong, well, not a very strong, but a strong-ish political alliance, which was an alliance with the extreme right, Bossi, and also with a post-fascist party, the Alleanza Nazionale, the National Alliance, that actually moved from very much on the right to more on the center with Gianfranco Fini. And this proved to be a very shaky alliance initially in '94. He lost power after only 7 months in power. But in the early 2000s, when he comes back in, this is what keeps him in power. Yeah. It's not simply the man, but it's also the alliance.
I think that's an important point. You know, Ruth, I spent some time in Italy. I was there the week before last reporting on the debt crisis, speaking to people. And one common thing that they said is what needs to change in Italy is the tax evasion, crack down on fraud, the black market economy. These are the problems that have been plaguing. There I am in Rome shopping, but really I was looking at the impact of austerity. But these problems that have been hurting Italy's economy for so long, Ruth, some would say were hard for Berlusconi to deal with because he embodied so many of them. Wouldn't you say?
Exactly. Absolutely. I think that you're making a very good point here. If we were talking about, as you will be in the program, about Berlusconi's legacies, this is exactly one of the main legacies of the Berlusconi era, not just the man, as Vivien rightly pointed out. We are talking about a system that he created and he put in place. And of course, of that system, he was the main stakeholder, and he profited from that system that he created. Let's remember that he also reformed the electoral law, and it made a much less democratic electoral law. So that, of course, he was able to get a very different political parties together, because let's remember that the Northern League has a federalist agenda, the Alleanza Nazionale has got a very unitary message, so he was a very shrewd politician. But of course, he profited from that system that he managed to create. And as one of the three main legacies that he is going to leave to Italy is exactly in terms of the broad sort of political legacy, is exactly that kind of political culture that he left, whereby tax evasion, corruption, ambiguity in terms of not being transparent. That is absolutely one of the main legacies that will remain and that will stick to his name, together with more structural legacies. The reforms and the reforms that he implemented, wrong reforms, like the reform of education and of the university, and the reforms that he promised and he didn't deliver on, like the reform of the public administration and the reform of the job market in the sense of having an equitable job market and of economic growth.
So
and the third legacy of...
No, I was just going to jump in here. For Vivien, you hear what Ruth is talking about, all of the problems and the legacies of Berlusconi. Does Mario Monti change all of it?
We can hope so. What's interesting about this is that Mario Monti set up a technical government, technocratic government, and this really worked in the early 90s. It worked when the political parties collapsed because of scandals, Mani Pulite, Clean Hands scandal, Tangentopoli, Bribe City scandal, and the entire, basically the entire system of Italian politics collapses. The Christian Democrats dissolve into nothing, and many of their leaders go to jail. But the socialists are also indicted for corrupt practices of various kind. And you ended up having a technical government at that time, two technical governments, and then an elected center-left government. And they really did clean things up. If you looked at the deficit at that period, it had been very high before, and it simply went down. Then Berlusconi comes back in 2000. It goes up, up, up. 2006 to 2008, when a Prodi government is in, it goes down again. So clearly, when the center-left or technical government is in, things do get cleaned up.
All right. Well,
it's not just...
We'll leave it on that optimistic message, though, that the technocrats come in and things get cleaned up. No question about it. Mario Monti is the anti... Sure.
Can I just say one more thing about this, which I think is important? It's that they had a whole discourse that convinced people that it was worth doing because it was all about joining the euro. So they had a tax for Europe. And this was in the 90s. So what you might see, what one could envision, is that Monti says, okay, this is about remaining in the euro. We have to make reforms. We have to tighten our belts. Mm-hmm. And the Italian people, if the Italian people are with him and trust him, you may really see serious reform.
All right, Vivien Schmidt of Boston University, thank you so much, and Ruth Santini of the Brookings Institution for your time this evening. Well, despite his fall from power, Berlusconi controls the country's largest media empire and a vast personal fortune. Have we really seen the last of the ousted prime minister in Italian politics? We'll talk about what the future holds when Berlusconi, End of an Empire, continues. Welcome back to our Bloomberg special, Berlusconi, End of an Empire. Italy turned a page today as Mario Monti was sworn in as the new prime minister. As we look to the country's future, what's next for Silvio Berlusconi? My next guest says it's too early to proclaim the end of Berlusconi's Italy. Maurizio Viroli is a professor of political science at Princeton. His new book, The Liberty of Servants, Berlusconi's Italy. Maurizio, welcome. Good to see you.
Good. Thank you for having me here.
Explain why we have not seen the last of Berlusconi, in fact, perhaps even in the political sphere.
Because Berlusconi has always been a fighter. He doesn't like to lose, and he fears that if he is out of power, meaning if he is no longer the prime minister, he is vulnerable to the judiciary. Therefore, he will try to come back directly or indirectly, and he has the chances and the power to do that.
What happens to all of the scandals and the lawsuits? Do they get resolved?
If you refer to the sex scandals, they are practically irrelevant to move the Italian public opinion. If you are referring to the league, irrelevant. They are completely irrelevant. They won't change. They have never damaged Berlusconi seriously. And if you are referring to the legal issues, that is to say, the accusations that Berlusconi has to answer for, they will take too much time to proceed. They are not that crucial at this stage of Italian political life.
If we look at his last chapter, being a prime minister, the last 2 decades that he's dominated Italian politics, what is the legacy?
A wrong conception of citizenship. What Berlusconi has left us with is a very bad electoral law, a few laws that are designed to sustain and to protect his personal interests, but both the electoral law and the personal laws protecting his interests can be changed. The real damage is that he has changed the mores, the mentality, the political culture of Italy. He has reinforced the secular old vices of Italian mentality, and therefore he has left us morally weak. We will not be able to recover as a country unless we change the political culture that Berlusconi has bequeathed us.
All right, Maurizio Viroli, thanks so much for joining us. The biographer of Silvio Berlusconi. It might be the end of this chapter of Berlusconi's political career here, but it does not mean the book is over.